Right, it's a couple of minutes past 1 o'clock, so good afternoon everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Thanks for joining us on time to listen to the launch of our 2018 UK Salary Guide. So there's the Rogues Gallery, 2 faces for radio and 1 consummate professional, so I'll let you choose between them. So by way of an introduction, my name is Duncan Bullymore, Director at Hayes Construction and Property. I'm joined today by my colleague at Hayes, Richard Gelder.
Good afternoon, everyone.
As well as Terry Watts, Managing Director at the CIOB. And Terry will be talking to you about some really important and current construction issues in the second half of this session. But to kick off though, Richard and I will talk you through the findings of the 2018 Salary and Recruiting Trends Guide. Be aware that the presentation is being recorded, so it will be downloadable from the Hayes website shortly after. Here's some number facts for you. This is the 4th year we've produced our UK guide, and it covers many salaries across 12 specialist areas throughout the UK. It's based on salary information provided by 1,900 Hayes recruiting experts across 94 branches in the UK. But as well as this, our own Hayes Insight, we also launched a survey designed to understand employee satisfaction and employers' concerns and gather other general insight into the market. Now, this survey secured over 17,500 responses from employers and employees alike, and 2,500 of these came from the construction industry. So to start then, let's set the scene quickly by recapping on last year's overall UK findings. In 2016, across all specialisms and regions we covered in the report, 62% of organisations expected their business activity to increase in the year ahead. 73% said they were planning to recruit, and the average salary increase for all UK professions was 1.8%. 62% of employees were considering moving jobs in the 12 months that followed. So, against the backdrop of continued economic and almost daily political uncertainty, as seen yesterday, and in the face of a very tight labour market, we're here to look at how the employment market is faring for construction and property today. So let's take a look at what our results showed in a little bit more detail. We'll start on a huge positive though, and that is employers remain optimistic about the market and about their businesses, although we have to accept that this is likely to be with a tinge of cautious optimism. Last year, 2/3 of construction and property employers expected their activity to increase in the 12 months that followed. This has slipped slightly to 63%, but it's still above the UK average for all professions at 59%. So the all UK piece has dropped from 62 to 59%, and for construction and property from 65 just back slightly to 63. But if you compare this type of statistic with other indices, like the market PMI report, which a lot of people see, where anything above 50 denotes expansion or growth or general positivity, I think we're still in reasonable shape. Breaking the numbers down a bit further, you can see that reassuringly the vast majority of employers continue to expect activity to increase or stay the same. And combined, this is 95% of employers, the same as last year. So it's a pretty broad spectrum of business confidence, but within this, there are a lot of companies doing really quite well. Quite a few customers that Richard and myself meet say they've never been busier. So I think, as a whole, it remains quite a positive indicator. Reflecting this continued business confidence, employers' plans for recruitment have remained solid. And we looked at organisations' plans to recruit over the coming 12 months, and positively, about 3/4 said they were planning to recruit during this time. Of those employers, 59% stated they plan to recruit more permanent staff and 41% more temporary or interim staff. And note that this could be employers hiring temporary and permanent, or temporary or permanent. And despite the positive outlook though, and businesses moving ahead with their plans, they are faced with huge recruitment challenges. And I do think that we are currently in one of the toughest recruitment markets of recent years. So let's take a look at this in a bit more detail at what challenges these employers are expecting. So this may be somewhat obvious, but I think still pertinent regarding skills shortages. They are ever present in all disciplines, but more so tending to be in technical areas. 3/4 of employers stated that they've experienced moderate to extreme skill shortages, and of these, 19% of them labelled them as extreme, and a lucky few, 3%, said none at all. So just looking at it in another way, 1 in 5 have experienced an extreme skill shortage, and 3 in 4 experiencing a moderate to extreme shortage. Skills shortages can have far-reaching consequences. And taking an example, that slippery and often bluntly defined metric of productivity is definitely affected, as 57% of employers did report in our survey. But what may be a bit less obvious is the impact this has on existing staff who are put under more pressure delivering more with less, and 14% have reported absence due to stress. So that's 1 in 7 employers losing staff working days, and that has to be some cause for concern. Now, we know that recruitment per se is one of businesses' top challenges, but in addition, 78% of employers responded saying that a shortage of suitable applicants was their top recruitment challenge for the year ahead. In the slides you've got in front of you now, you can see how this compares in other sectors, many of which are suffering similar shortages, and it is 77% of all UK employers that thought it was their top recruitment challenge. Now, construction and property professions are towards the top end of this range, but I don't think dramatically worse off. But for those employers looking for skills typically that are coming with experience, looking for other approaches to hiring might be worthwhile during these times. For example, temporary contract or interim workers, meeting peaks in demand or where there are skills gaps. But often the benefits of temporary and interim staff are underrated or even not known. And just a few to consider maybe. Often you get a wider range of different experience than you get from your permanent staff because of their exposure to different employers, different projects, different challenges. They're often highly specialised individuals by choice, which is not always the luxury you get from permanent staff. Individuals can be used, individuals that are used hit the ground running because they're not expecting a honeymoon period. It's not how they work. And there's no ongoing employment costs beyond the project or purpose you've taken them on for. So these types of workers certainly can have their place in your overall staffing strategy. Now also we've discovered that 51% of construction employers are training permanent staff to take on new responsibilities. And this training approach seems to be quite popular, as 51% are upskilling existing staff. Now, as part of this, 41% reported they've increased their training budget, and 27% have increased their use of apprentices to help fill the skills gaps, albeit I don't think there's any correlation with the apprenticeship levy. As we'll have heard in the last couple of weeks, the uptake of new apprenticeships is disappointingly low. But this focus on career development and CPD has become a key attraction method for almost 1 in 5 employers. Another finding is that career progression is key. But as it stands, concerns about the scope for career progression has increased on last year, albeit by quite a small percentage. And this may have something to do with general concerns about Brexit and the industry as a whole. So if nearly half of all employees believe there's no scope for progression with their current employer, there's surely some negative connotations that could come from that. Now, this may explain the greater emphasis we've seen on job security, which 18% of employees are now saying is the main reason for wanting to move roles. But we must add that this is a reduced figure from last year. Now, employers are largely recognise the importance of job security too, with 19% saying it's an important tool for when they're attracting new staff. So they're trying to highlight at interview the size and strength of their order book, their financial strength, and other things that are going to play to this agenda. But that 18% does surpass the attraction of their benefits packages at 16% and even the CPD at 18%. But curiously though, this concern about job security is a bit of a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, employees are being encouraged to leave their roles in search of more secure ones, but on the other hand, they're more likely to stay with their current organisation rather than risk moving. So a little bit of a conundrum there. But this lack of movement in some cases is actually creating the skills shortage, especially in high demand professions, maybe such as QSing, engineering or project management. But despite the greater concerns around job security, the market is strong enough to encourage 54% of employees to consider changing jobs in the next year. Right, over to you, Richard.
Thanks, Duncan. Okay, so let's move on to the salary detail now. And this is still the #1 factor in recruitment, as it forms roughly 50% of an individual's decision-making to whether they stay with a current employer or whether they look for a new position. So let's start by looking at the detail. And as you can see from the headline on the slide here, the average salary increase within construction and property roles was 2.7% for the year. This is one of the highest sector averages in the UK, so by comparison, the overall average salary increase of all the other professional areas combined is at 1.8%. And on the next slide, you can see the trend of salary growth for the C&P sector over the last few years, and as you can see, it has slowed over the last couple of years in particular. But as mentioned in the previous slide, as a sector, construction and property is ahead of the UK growth. So whilst it's less than previous years, it's still larger than the UK average. However, what it does confirm is what we've seen in the last couple of years, and this is really about a much improved and greater level of control by employers when making new employment offers in regard to salary levels. And this is absolutely something that wasn't happening in particularly 2014 and 2015, and subsequently in those years, salary growth was much higher. And I suppose the final point to make here is that as salary differentials close, it will highlight that employers will have to compete more on the non-salary elements of the employment offer. So this will include things like the benefit packages, career development, company culture. The other key trend we've seen over the last couple of years has been the growth of workloads outside of London and the South. So heavily summarised, this has been a cycle of busier local markets, which has led to increased recruitment levels, which has fueled the competition for skills and has therefore inflated salary levels. So, as you can see, whilst London and the South still remains the highest regions in terms of salary growth, it is now closely followed by the Midlands and North West. Now, we'll have to see if this is a longer-term trend, but it's certainly something that we'd expect to maintain into the immediate future, given the strong current regional workloads. Now, let's have a look at some of the key roles in demand. And as you can see here, given the huge number of projects that have got underway over the last couple of years, the job titles that command the highest increases are tending towards the on-site delivery roles, but also there are some roles which are particularly skill short as well, such as the BIM technician. And obviously, in both these areas, there is significant recruitment competition around. Now, it's important to say that this doesn't mean that there isn't significant growth in other construction and property areas too, but it's certainly true that there has been a reduction in year-on-year salary growth in certain areas, and among these you've got general practice surveyors, you've got residential valuation, you've got architecture. However, all of these areas were still at 2% more in terms of their salary growth, which is still above the UK average of 1.8%, so that is the context there. And it's absolutely reflective of the overall positive market that Duncan outlined earlier, albeit cautious positivity as we look ahead. So now let's start to have a look at the employee view. And as you can see, there is still a high level of employee dissatisfaction with salary levels within the C&P sector at 55%. So again, context is very important here. The 55% figure is relatively unchanged from recent years and is broadly consistent with what we'd expected. And to a certain extent, of course, it's no surprise. After all, it's fairly natural that we'd all want to be paid more money. And as you can see here, 31% of employees cited that salaries and benefits is the main reasons for wanting a move. But overall, what it does reinforce that if you link salary dissatisfaction with career progression concerns and indeed job security concerns, then given certain circumstances, there could be a significant percentage of the construction and property workforce who may be open to a job change, and it certainly highlights the need for employers to remain proactive around the wider issues of reviewing employee satisfaction and motivation, such as annual salary benchmarking reviews or engagement around future company growth plans. Relatively simple areas, but both could help with staff retention, indeed new employee attraction. So, the last area from the survey we're going to highlight is the growing importance of work-life balance. And to start, let's look back to a key statistic from the What Workers Want report that we published in June of this year. And this was that 35% of construction and property sector employees would take a pay cut for better holidays. And it's a statistic which highlights the change we've seen in recent years around work-life balance and the growing importance of this area to employees. In this year's salary survey, we found that over half of all construction and property professionals surveyed had concerns around their work-life balance. Indeed, there was a higher proportion of construction and property sector employees who described their work-life balance as average, which was 36%, and this compared to 30% of the UK as a whole across all sectors and professions. Now, as you can see from the slide, 15% of construction and property sector employees rated their work-life balance as poor to very poor, and whilst it's a minority, it's still a sizable percentage. This is further illustrated, as you can see here. Almost a quarter of construction and property employees rate work-life balance as the most important factor when considering a new role. But as you can also see, there is a gap here with employers, with only 16% of them placing an importance on work-life balance when trying to attract new candidates for a role. This highlights the more complex picture we're now seeing around employee retention and attraction. Obviously, salary remains key, but increasingly work-life balance is growing in importance, and indeed, for many people, is actually a more important element of the employment ratio alongside the salary, career development, and company culture. So, we hope you found these insights that we've shared so far useful, and we'll now draw them together into a summary and some key recommendations. So firstly, to summarise the key findings, and as you can see from the main headline, the recruitment challenges remain significant, and we've isolated 5 issues here. Firstly, employer confidence remains positive, albeit, as Duncan reflected, cautiously positive, with 95% saying activity will grow or remain the same. Now, obviously, none of us have a crystal ball, but right now, the outlook looks broadly unchanged within the construction and property sector year on year. This leads into the second point, that recruitment remains a priority for the majority, with 74% saying that they plan to recruit in the year ahead. Thirdly, that skills shortages persist, highlighted by 3/4 of employees as a key issue, and could possibly get worse in the future, particularly with growing concerns in some quarters of less EU workers in the UK in years to come. Fourth, given skills shortages, temporary staff remain an important part of the staffing mix, particularly relevant within the construction and property sector, given the need to deliver projects and workloads to deadline. And finally, while salaries remain the #1 issue around staff retention and attraction, work-life balance is now an established part of the employment ratio and an increasingly important one. So, what does that all mean? Well, we've highlighted 4 recommendations which we think are important in what remains a very competitive recruitment market. So firstly, permanent workforce planning remains a strategic priority, and the investment that we've seen in recent years in this area has to continue if employers want to continue to be successful in retaining and attracting staff, particularly given, as Duncan highlighted, we remain in a tough recruitment market. Secondly, that in a skills-short market, where it may not always be possible to attract or recruit permanent staff as quickly as you may want, then utilising temp workers to alleviate workload pressures remains a key tactic. Thirdly, the employment proposition now needs to be wider than salary alone. It also needs to include work-life balance and other elements such as a positive company culture and enhanced career development prospects. And then finally, getting the salary right still remains the key issue. Yes, there is absolutely more of a need for a balanced proposition or offer, but the salary still has to be right and in line with the market to ensure the best possible chances of attracting new staff and also ensuring the maximum retention of existing staff. So that concludes the first part of the presentation, and thank you for your time so far. We will take questions at the end of the second presentation, and I'll now hand over to Terry Watts, who is the Managing Director of the CIOB. Terry, over to you.
Well, thank you for inviting me to talk. I've got a little bit more of a summary of the sector, really, rather than focusing on the facts and figures, which are really interesting and actually chime very well with our findings and our feeling of what's going on in the sector. And I've called my little bit, the construction's got to change. I've been working alongside the construction sector now for about 20 years, and the need for change has always been evident, I think, and we're coming to a point now where we can't resist it anymore. So hopefully, not just employers in the sector, but with the government, the professional bodies like ourselves and the training providers, and of course employees, we need to change the way that construction operates quite radically over the next few years. I think you'll agree, hopefully, after this presentation anyway. So these figures are taken from the latest Bayes survey. This is actually from last month's Introduction to Sector Deals, which they published as part of the industrial strategy. And it shows you that they've recognised, as we all knew anyway, that with a turnover of 370 billion and such a contribution to value add in the economy and employing 3.1 million people, construction is one of the biggest sectors in the UK and vitally important to the success and productivity of the UK. And clearly skills shortages, as you guys have highlighted very clearly, are one of the biggest issues facing construction, and how we manage to maintain the growth and the quality that we already have and actually improve all of that while we're faced with quite significant skill shortages. And one of the biggest challenges I think we face is if you look at the margins, certainly in the large contractors, they're so low, 2 to 5% isn't a bad margin for some of the bigger companies in the sector. How do you get people on working on margins quite as tight as that to invest in innovation and skills development? So that's one of the big challenges we face, and I think that's one of the places where the government can help us. Those margins aren't the same at all parts of the sector, and there have been some new stories in the press quite recently about famously high margins in the house building sector. So maybe there's a responsibility of some of those people to take a slightly smaller margin, share it out a bit perhaps, but certainly reinvest in some of the skills and issues that we see facing the sector. As a professional body, our job is actually to improve the built environment for the public good, and skills are clearly a part of making sure we do a good job of that. Our findings with our members and the employers we talk to chime very closely with the survey that you guys have done, because despite the unprecedented political uncertainty and economic uncertainty, I mean, yesterday was kind of a class, was a master class in how to drive uncertainty. There's still a positive outlook in the industry. I think it's quite tentative, but there is a positive outlook, and people are, as you said, our employers are telling us they're looking to grow as well. There's some big projects going on, large infrastructure ones like HS2 and the power stations being built there, which will make a big difference to the overall impact of the sector. But of course, that's only the large companies and big projects. But the good news is recently, I think, is the government have recognised they need more housing. Now, that's been in the rhetoric for a long while, and they're talking about actually doing something to actually support the growth of more house building. So that should help the house building sector a lot more as well. So it's looking, there are things coming along our way to help things improve. And as infrastructure accounts for about nearly half of the construction growth in the coming years, then I think hopefully that will start to see an improvements on those as well, especially as the infrastructure is moving out of London. There's been a lot of infrastructure development in London, but as your report showed, it's moving to Wales and the southwest as well now. So that looks like things are growing. And job growth is slower than previously forecast, but even now, 35,000 new workers needed per year to maintain the level of growth that we anticipate. And the CITB blueprint report shows that there's still significant need in some of the trades as well. One of the things I was really pleased to see in the Bayes description of the sector is because previously they tended to focus on kind of the biblical trades, the carpenters and the plasterers and the bricklayers and so on. But they recognise now the sector incorporates a lot more of the professional skills as well. And I was delighted to see in your survey that my members are the ones who are most in demand according to your survey. So that will be good. But there are also more of the trade skills still need to be filled there, as well as the technical levels. So we've got wood, interior fit, and electricians looking for more people in those areas too. So that's all good news from the skills landscape. There are not good news, it's bad news, but at least we know what the challenges are facing us, and we need to try and work out how we're going to do that. So in terms of improving the built environment and making sure that we look at the whole issue as a round rather than just focusing on one particular aspect of it. You've already talked about the reliance on migrant labour, and it's particularly acute in London with 52%, and maybe won't have such a big impact as the Brexit reforms, whatever they end up being, come to bite in the rest of the country. But certainly London's got a problem with the reliance on migrant labour, and there will still continue to be a need for temporary and short-term employment. Construction has tended to train people for short-term needs, as I mentioned before. We need to make sure that there is investment in longer-term skills. Maybe even eventually there could be a change to the business model where more people are employed and less subcontracting goes on, but that's a huge cultural change for the sector. And as I said before, how do you persuade a sector on low margins to invest for the longer term? It's very difficult for them to do that. It's very difficult to make sure that fits on the balance sheet. But we do need to try and address those issues, and we do need to make it beneficial for companies to do so. The workforce is ageing. 19% of the workforce set to retire over the next 5 to 10 years. And with that workforce goes a huge amount of experience and skills, which you can't just recruit and replace. So it's not just the actual hands-on skills, but it's the experience to do those jobs, which often based on decades of experience of working in the sector. And of course, there's still the problem of attracting new people into the industry. Construction generally is still seen not as being a very favourable industry to go in by young people. Most people's experience of construction is of an extension being built at home or of the things they see on the high street, which doesn't necessarily make them realise the full value of what the sector is all about, the sorts of jobs that are required. And people don't realise often how technology-driven it is now and will become more so in the future with the professional services and the off-site construction, all those activities going on behind the scenes. And the poor quality house building has been in the news as well recently. It's not true that all house builders produce poor quality, obviously, but particularly some of the bigger ones tend to maintain those margins perhaps by doing more house building too fast and not snagging quite as thoroughly as they used to, and certainly not as thoroughly as they should do. And one of the quotes from one of the things I saw recently was if you went along and paid a fortune for a car, they're probably the second biggest purchase a typical family makes, you drive it away from the showroom and 999 times out of 100 or even more than that, the car comes away perfectly working order and there's no problems with it. Yet only 90% of people who move into houses are satisfied with the house they get. Yet that's the biggest purchase they make. And that projects a public image of construction which isn't good, and that reflects on the whole of the industry, not just on the house building sector, because construction is put in one pot by young people looking for careers and parents advising young people looking for careers. So we need to try and work and reduce that kind of activity. The renewed focus from government does help us reset expectations and does allow us to to try and change the industry. With the activities, I'll tell you a bit more about what they're trying to do. We can look at how we can use new technologies and hopefully skill people up to develop those new technologies and bring them back into the mainstream of what we're trying to do. And even as you move, before when they've defined construction, it's all been on-site, with more being done off-site now. That used to take the skills issues as far as construction was concerned and government's investment out of the construction portfolio and put them into the manufacturing portfolio. But obviously there's still construction skills involved, and now I think the government are beginning to recognise that the sector is wider and has implications in other parts of the UK economy. But we need to use those new technologies in terms of materials, methods of production, as well as robots and drones and all those kinds of things to make sure that we do get the benefits of those for construction. There's been talk about the working environment as well, and it's really important. Our members have come back to us on issues about mental health and work-life balance being more and more important. It's a very robust sector, often working to tight deadlines and high pressures, and with the constant focus on cost as well, overruns and those kinds of activities putting huge pressure on staff. We need to make sure that we get the working environment right, or we'll lose people rather than recruiting more to it. And also the professionalisation. There's been far too many problems in the last few years which could have been fixed possibly by professional ethics and professional processes being followed through to the letter, absolutely, and made sure that people had oversight of all those kinds of activities that go on a site, which is a very complicated environment. So if we can get more people to be professional, and obviously that's my vested interest as well, becoming a professional member of the Chartered Institute of Building is what I want to see people to do. And then we can get things right first time, which will of course drive up quality. We'll see things done absolutely right the first time if people pay attention to that. Maybe more time and money is put into getting things right first time, and that will drive up productivity too. How much time and money is spent going back fixing problems that should have been fixed or shouldn't have been a problem in the first place. They should have been done right the first time, and if they weren't, they should have been rectified before the product was handed over to the customer. But there's no simple opportunity here. It feels like we're witnessing kind of a change in the way that the industry is looking at itself and being looked at by the government and by the workforce. And we need to change the workforce as well, because we will lose the opportunity of using migrant workers to the same extent as we had in the past. But it feels like we're actually kind of a crossroads now. And as the industry starts to deliver far-reaching social outcomes that go beyond the sector itself and go beyond the price tag, I hope the government has picked up that message as well, and will work with all of us to try and make the image of this sector and the challenges we face kind of a shared objective. And to be fair to the government, they have done some big announcements recently. There's the new National Retraining Scheme supporting reskilling people, with a £64 million investment there in digital and construction training, which is a good start. The Transforming Infrastructure Performance Programme will also use the power of government spending to try and introduce some of these new technologies, so giving people the opportunity to take the chance, if you like, or to test out and develop and use new technologies in the construction programs they are starting to develop with them, so the HS2s and the bigger construction infrastructure projects. And the sector deal as well, looking at innovation and skills investment. We're really keen as well on the graduate apprenticeship scheme and the T-levels that are coming along, and really would encourage our members and industry generally to try and focus on those activities. The idea of getting people to a professional level, well, initially a T-level, getting them into the sector and trying to prepare them for work in the sector, and then getting them to a professional standard through the graduate apprenticeship scheme is really what industry needs. And for the young people, getting to that level of graduate and also professional without having to burden themselves with lots of student loans and that sort of activity is good for parents and good for teachers. So we see there are tools the government are providing to help us make the investment in skills and the routes into the market more attractive. And really, we need to work together with as industries, as professional bodies and trade associations to try and make sure all of that kind of activity is integrated. I was talking to some employers recently, and they said, well, we go and work in schools, but we went to one last week and found out that our competitors had been there the week before and someone else had been there the week before that, and then you guys are going in next week. So the same schools are getting visited by many of us, and lots of schools probably aren't being visited by any of us. That's just one example where perhaps we could coordinate our efforts a bit more carefully. But the big shift in government rhetoric, I think, from previous years where there's been a lot of talk about it, the industrial strategy and speech from the Prime Minister saying they're looking to intervene, light touch perhaps, but hopefully they'll intervene in helping us to try and fix the issues facing construction for the good of the public generally, really. And we've had meetings already with people at BIS who are keen to, BAs as they are now, to make sure that they are able to engage correctly with the industry. And they're very focused on working on that model with us, as with other professional bodies. So I think all the ingredients are there for us to come forward and look at the look at plans to try and develop the skills and to fix some of those issues. We can't say we don't know what they are. We have got some tools to try and fix them, and we have got some tools provided by the government to try and help us engage them in fixing those issues too. So I think all of the there's a lot to do. We're at a crossroads, but I think there's a possibility that the industry has to anyway actually start developing its own pipeline of skills and take much more attention to the workforce and see how we can make their careers with us to be more rewarding, and in terms of their financial reward, as you mentioned in your salary survey, but also in terms of their work-life balance. So I think that's all I want to say for now. I'll pass the control back over to the guys at Hayes, if I can do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Terry. That was brilliant. I think it's always really good to hear that big picture overview, because you know, that's the sort of thing which I think really complements our sort of quite here and now perspective. So thank you very much indeed for that. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to open up the floor to any questions for Duncan, Terry, or myself, and we've got a few which have come in here. So we'll just take probably 5 minutes or so. We'll just work through a few of these. Duncan, have you got?
Yeah, this looks like a Hayes one for Hayes. So construction salaries seem to have performed well in the last 12 months. Do you think salaries will increase further in the year ahead? So do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll go with that one. So I think you know, all the caveats which I suppose we put into the presentation apply here. None of us have a crystal ball, etc. But I think, on the assumption that the status quo maintains, then I think the best guess we can offer is that the salaries will maintain at the sort of level of growth that we've seen in the last couple of years. And I think, you know, for me, what's been very noticeable is things felt a little bit out of control probably in 2014 and 2015. There was an awful lot of hiring going on, and I don't necessarily think that employers were particularly prepared for it. And I think in the last couple of years, as employers have been more prepared, I think that's helped from an employer perspective, at least, in terms of help to manage the pay rate or the salary inflation. So I think probably at the moment the sort of 2.7% or there or thereabouts is probably a good indication of where it's likely to go, all things being equal. Would you add anything to that, Duncan, at all, or what would you? No, you're happy with that? Okay, lovely. Okay, any other questions then? What else have we got?
There's another one here, probably looks like one for Terry. So Terry, what are professional bodies doing to ensure their offering stays relevant to employers?
Okay, there's quite a long answer to this, but I'll try and make it short. The key thing that we do is our professional standards are all based on our education framework, which defines what we believe are the professional skills required of a CIB member in the workplace. And we're constantly updating that. We're working with employers and members throughout the year on our various committees to make sure that we keep things up to date and that we recognise trends in the industry. So in the last few weeks, or last few months anyway, we've added in, for example, some more emphasis on ethics and making sure that that's something that is thought about. The impact of the construction sector on the built environment and the general public has been added in, and technology. Most recently we had technology in there anyway, but the possible implications for cyber security and making sure that people, with more and more of the construction information being in BIM and in data, that people are covering, making sure they're securing that data so it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, and cyber security issues along there. So those sorts of additions we're making to our education framework all the time. We also feel that our job is to make sure there are highly or appropriately qualified and professional people out there. So for construction project managers, and we have our various programs which we've mapped to the standards. So, for example, our membership is equivalent to a degree level, and our fellowship is equivalent to a master's level degree mapped formally, and providing more routes to people to come in there. One of the things we don't require is a degree for people to join, so they can come in, and if they can demonstrate to a group of our assessors that they're competent, and they have to write a paper and they have to do some things, but they can come straight into even at fellowship level into the CIOB as long as they can pass the hurdles that our members put there, then they can go straight in. So making sure there are more qualified people, I think, against relevant educational frameworks is the key thing we can do. But also reaching out to schools and raising the profile of construction. So we've been very much behind the modern slavery campaign that's generally across industry, but certainly in construction. And we're doing a lot of work in schools, trying to partner with other people to, as I mentioned in my talk, to make sure that we go out with a consistent message to schools about the wide and rewarding jobs there are to be done in the construction sector. And then finally, providing some of the training. So we launched our academy a year ago today, actually. We launched the CIOB Academy, which is primarily going to be online, but a lot of face-to-face training in London, particularly at the moment, and spreading around the country to provide some gaps where we think there are gaps in the training provision to people, usually at the managerial and supervisory levels in the industry, but also some webinars and free CPD to people generally across the sector to try and raise the profile of the key issues that the sector is facing. So there's a whole load of things that we're doing. I'm sure the other professional bodies are doing very similar things as well, because it's really about making sure the skills are out there and the industry has the tools in its kit bag to try and address its own issues. So does that answer the question?
I think that was a brilliant answer.
And now you'll hear two slightly less brilliant answers, but thank you, Terry. So we've got another one here, and we've had two versions of the same question. So we're getting asked, does the salary trends data drill down into specific sectors such as building services, commercial construction, etc.? So the answer to that question is yes, it does. We're doing some work with various of the professional bodies. We're doing some work, for example, with CIBSE and the CIBSE Journal, which will promote some findings around that sector. We're also working with the likes of BIF and one or two other bodies, and obviously the CIOB. So I think generally yes, but the best thing we can advise there is probably engage on a sort of one-on-one basis if that's what you feel is appropriate. We've also had a couple of questions around just the idea of attracting candidates. So we've got a variation on the theme from two people here saying, you know, how do we attract candidates using our employer brand? Duncan, is that one you can pick up?
Well, I suppose quite a broad question, but I think in this, you know, with this undertone of upskilling and training and investing in the face of skills shortages and, you know, an outflow of talent and skills, I think making a really compelling proposition to people coming into the industry or moving around the industry on that agenda is quite important. So whether it's I don't know, whether it's tapping into the diversity and inclusion agenda, women in construction, which we've launched a big report in the last couple of weeks on, or whether it's thinking about the demographic, the age demographics of people that you're trying to attract. Because if you're looking at, you know, Generation Z, for instance, I get my generations mixed up, but the later generations are place much more value on career development when looking for a new role. Whereas if we take the baby boomers, you know, the 50s, 60s, whatever, those people are much more interested in work-life balance, which were both findings from our What Workers Want report from a couple of months ago. So I think it's being tuned into the types of people you're trying to attract, tailoring your proposition, but really demonstrating that you are there to invest rather than just interested in a transient workforce.
Can I add to that? I think you're absolutely right there. And one of the key things that I think we underestimate the younger generation. I can say that now, I'm old enough to these days, in that you assume that a lot of what they're after is money, and of course, you know, money and material gain is what, you know, a lot of people go to work for. But I think that they do actually value their personal development and their impact on society a lot more than we give them credit for. I think they're more aware of that, certainly, than I was when I was young. And one of the things that concerns us is the number of people who start out on a construction-related degree, for example, and then finish it, but don't come into the construction sector. And I think offering people the opportunity to continue their development and continue their skills acquisition once they've started work would be a really good way of attracting people into the sector. So we tend to otherwise be fishing ever more in the same pool of resources, and that only pushes the prices up for everybody. And if we can get more people, certainly the younger ones, into the sector and invest in them a little bit, because they won't be 100% productive from day one, we can start to build more of a pipeline of skills into the sector for us, which is absolutely vital. And it starts at universities when they do their degree, and then they move on to go and work in the city or in retail or something else, rather than come into construction. So I think that'd be a good focus for people.
Right, excellent. I think we've pretty much covered off all of the questions that have come through, so I think we're going to leave it there. So I started off by saying there were two faces for radio, one consummate professional. Terry Watts, CIOB, was that consummate professional, so thank you very much for contributing, Terry. Thank you to everybody who's taken up part of their don't want to say lunchtime because that's a thing of the past, isn't it? But partway through the day time. Now, if you'd like to request a copy of the guide, you can either go, as you can see the link there on the hayes.co.uk website, or to any of your local trusted Hayes recruiters. But thank you very much for dialing in, and cheerio.